and social enterprise, but also just some wonderful connections and opportunities that we hope you'll be able to make in this session. So my name is Debbie Bacq. I started with Catalyst 2030 just about a year ago, and I left my tenured position in academia after 20 years of teaching to come work for Catalyst. Don't even know if I'll have a job in another 2 years, but that's how much I absolutely love the work of Catalyst 2030. So if you haven't heard about Catalyst, we will mention it at the end. But we do want to kick off the session as people are coming in. We've had over 200 people registered, and they always come in late. You know us academics. So I do want to kick off and welcome our amazing Sophie Bacq from Indiana University. You all know her, and I just want to point out, my favorite little data point was, what? You have 1,000 citations and you have no gray hair yet? What is wrong here? So she has been cited from her first article in 2011, really got the most citations, but some of the newer research that Sophie's doing is absolutely brilliant. And we're excited to have you here as the moderator for this panel. She's a co-conspirator, you know, with Jill Kickle on the Social Entrepreneurship Research Conference, and has some really fun forthcoming articles that are coming. So Sophie, I will kick it off to you to introduce our other speakers.
Thank you very much, Debbie and Catalyst 2030. Pleasure to be here. Thanks for the very kind introduction. And now it's my great pleasure and honor to introduce three amazing scholars in the field of social entrepreneurship and three good friends as well. And so I'll start with Professor Johanna Mair, who's a professor at the Hertie School of Governance in Berlin. Johanna is also the co-director of the Global Innovation for Impact Lab at the Stanford Center on Philanthropy and Civil Society. And if you don't know this, academic director at the Stanford Social Innovation Review. Johanna probably doesn't need introduction. She's my longest time ever inspiration. Debbie mentioned something about my publications, but it's fair to say that the Mair and Morty 2006 Social Entrepreneurship Research, a source of explanation, projection, and delight, published in 2006 in the Journal of World Business, was really an inspiration as I started my PhD. And so I'm so grateful to be welcoming Johanna today on this panel. Second is Professor Ralph Hamann, who's a professor at the University of Cape Town Graduate School of Business. He's also the co-founder of the Southern Africa Food Lab and what is now the South African chapter of the Embedding Project. His research is primarily on organizational responses to complex social and environmental problems and entrepreneurship under resource-constrained environments. Ralph produces very impactful and engaged research. A favorite of mine, more recent, I looked at his extensive bio last night, is the organization theory article published in 2020 with co-author titled Neither Colony Nor Enclave, Calling for Dialogical Contextualism in Management and Organization Studies. So welcome, Ralph, and great to see you here after spending some time together in South Africa last June. And finally, it's my great pleasure to welcome Satyajit Majumdar, who is a professor and dean of the School of Management and Labor Studies at Tata Institute of Social Sciences in Mumbai. He's also the member of governing board of the National Innovation Foundation. His most impactful study on my scholarship is the Choi and Majumdar 2014 Journal of Business Venturing. You may have read it. I'm sure you have. Social entrepreneurship as an essentially contested concept, opening a new avenue for systematic future research. Satyajit and I have not had a chance to meet in person, so we're going to fix that very soon, I hope. But thank you all for joining, and delighted to have a conversation with these three stellar scholars. So we'll start with Johanna for some remarks to kick us off as one of the founders of the field of social entrepreneurship. Johanna, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Sophie, and thank you so much for this incredible introduction, Debbie. Thank you for actually doing what you're doing, much needed, and for convening all of us. So the session today is about trends, and I'm not going to tell you what trends I think there are, because you know better than I do, but I will tell you a little bit what I conceive for myself as the frontiers of my own work on social entrepreneurship, social enterprise. And we will have more room to discuss trends as I see like who is in the room with all of you, apart from the four of us. I see that a lot of room for discussion, but obviously overall we have came a long way in this field of research, if you will. And social entrepreneurship, social enterprise is now a phenomenon discussed in management, entrepreneurship, public administration, also in geography study, regional development studies, just to name a few. And yet we have not really achieved the goal of creating a community that we also take really seriously, also the more conceptual and theoretical insights that emerge from these disciplinary angles. So that's something for me that I would love to see more, and where we all can have a more essential role. Obviously, other trends are related to also more data being available, but more data, and especially comparative data available, also means that we also need to be very careful about how we analyze data and do comparative work going forward. But let me turn to what I consider as some of the frontiers that I, together with my wonderful co-authors, would like to make progress on. The first pocket here is tending to the political side of entrepreneurship. And I just mentioned here deliberately is a couple of projects that are literally not published yet, in order to give you a sense of what is in the making. And one has to do with also scrutinize the social change strategies that social enterprises adopt. And here comparative work is really important, because it allows us to understand how does also political systems and the political makeup of countries shape the specific social change strategies social enterprises adopt. This is work that I do with Nico Ratter, where we build on the database of Sephoris developed with Ute and Marieke, for example. Now, the second area where I also think we can have a much more nuanced discussion about social enterprises relates more to political theory, and more specifically political philosophy, where I work with a political philosopher, with my friend Ted Lechterman, and where we try to understand social enterprises more from a normative theory. Normative, not so much in terms of prescriptive, but also really understand what justifies social enterprises in the first place. I think that's a very useful way to advance us and get us a little bit more away from normatively assuming that every social enterprise and entrepreneurship is good. And the final frontiers that I'm literally starting to embark on with my wonderful colleague Sebastian Menard here at the Hertie School, and our newly appointed postdoc Ignace Bruder, together with other universities that are part of this consortium Rebalance. And this is a project where the three of us will look at the relationship between social enterprise and democracy even more in a more granular way. So to understand how does what social enterprises do affect, strengthen or weaken democracy, but also how social enterprises are living up to democratic principles internally. Now, the second pocket, if you will, speaks also obviously to what Debbie does with Catalyst, really foregrounding collective action as really essential to also what social enterprises do. That social enterprises really also are the, what I always say, the Weltmeisters of collaboration is clear. Also, our work on Sephoris and what I've written about social enterprises in a descriptive way, 90% 95% of social enterprises that we had in our sample of 1,000, they all collaborate. Right? There's no doubt about that, but we can also think about collective action going forward. And this is where I work together with a wonderful group of scholars under the name of ROSI, Research on Open Social Innovation, to really attend to these more open and participative forms of social innovation and implications of that. One of the projects that I'm currently working on together with Thomas Gegenhuber, who is a professor at the Johannes Kepler University in Linz, is to look at social enterprises in the context of open social innovation as orchestrators. And then there is also room, I think we all can spend more time on in thinking about implication as social enterprises and social entrepreneurship has become much more prolific. It also means there's almost a new occupational group emerging that is not just anymore the founders of a social enterprise, the heroic founders, but also who leads a social enterprise. And this is work where Ute, Stefan, and Marieke, again, building on comparative work, are trying to understand the uniqueness of leaders of social enterprises in terms of also the value profile, value constellations, and again, understanding nuances across different contexts. And perhaps here in small, another key aspect of the work that I'm currently doing, which is also central to the work of Catalyst 2030, that very focus also on system entrepreneurship, is really bringing social systems back into organizational research. This is work, the only part that is published here with Christian Selos in organization theory, which provides actually an analytical scaffolding for us to connect the study of social problems and social systems, to understand how and if social enterprise can actually also change system. I stop here and I very much look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Johanna. Always very clear and right on time. You're an inspiration on all levels. Thank you so much. And so we'll feed questions after all of the presentations. So please write them somewhere, and we hope for a good discussion. Next, we're giving the floor to Ralph Hammond.
Great, thanks so much, Sophie. Is sound okay, Sophie? Yep. Yeah. So, yes, next slide, please. So what I'll speak to is not so much a program of work like Johanna did, for two reasons. One, the first is that I'm not as disciplined in my research program as Johanna and the others on the panel are, so I didn't want to be too, a bit scattered. And number two, I'm currently working on this project, which I'm also quite keen to, whatever feedback there might be or any kind of responses, I'm really excited to hear from anyone, all of you in the room, anyone in the room. So the project is something that came out of the COVID lockdown hunger crisis that we had in South Africa from when the lockdown started in March 2020. Many, especially in the urban, underserved communities that we have in cities like Cape Town, there is a long-term hunger crisis, but this hunger crisis really became a lot worse during and because of the lockdowns. And so what we saw happening was that there was this spontaneous establishment of what the literature refers to as emergent groups. The activists themselves in Cape Town called themselves collective action networks or community action networks, or CANs for short. And within literally something like 2 weeks, we had literally hundreds of these CANs establish themselves. And so on the one hand, on the left side, you had these solidarity focused initiatives, these emergent groups. But since then, I've been doing a lot of reading around this. And what's interesting is that crises can also lead to polarization, which is the opposite of solidarity, right? And so the picture I've used here is actually from history, South African history, where a flu epidemic in 1904 led to the eviction of, in this case, migrant Indian workers. And later on, the Spanish flu was actually used as a kind of trigger by the white minority to create these separate residential areas for Black residents. So it was basically, in fact, it triggered something that then became institutionalized as apartheid city planning. And so I've been really struck by this contrast that on the one hand, sometimes you have this solidarity response, but also crises can create this polarization. Of course, we saw polarization also in COVID-19 in India and in the US and other places. If you go a step further, please, the literature is around emergent groups doesn't really tell us why and how emergent groups enact solidarity across groups with different social identities and place-based identities. You know, this, if we had more time, I could go a little bit more into this literature, but for now, I'm just going to leave it at that kind of research rationale that we're trying to address with this paper. So in terms of the methods or actual research, it involved case studies of 11 emergent groups, most of them in Cape Town, but also one in a rural area. And 8 of these emergent groups were in partnership with each other across these very different and very divided communities, right? So the picture here is just to give you a little bit of a sense of just how different these communities are. But the picture is actually misleading because those of you that know South Africa will know that apartheid was all about keeping these kinds of communities distant from each other. So there's actually very few places in South Africa where these kinds of communities are so close as in the photograph. And so these partnerships, some of them went something like 10 kilometers distant where these communities came together, right? And so we had a bunch of interviews. I'm not going to bore you with any more of the methods, except to say that quite a lot of our team members were active participants in these groups. So there was a bit of an insider perspective that we also were bringing to this research. So in terms of the basic findings, again, I just want to give you a quick overview of this emergent model. So we've been thinking about what is triggering some or other action. And the thing that really comes to the fore is an emotional driver, right? So the crisis triggered what we call an emergency feeling. In fact, it was one of our interviewees. And the emergency feeling is about fear and care, both for self and for others. And also a lot of uncertainty, as well as a kind of a pretty vague feeling of, I need to do something. I can't just sit back and watch this situation unfold. And now what I think is interesting is that feeling could go either way. I think it can trigger polarization, but in the case of these emergent groups, it was channeled in a particular kind of way by the activists, by the kind of leading activists. And what they did is what we refer this as a normative framing. They kind of said, this is a situation for solidarity. They explained why they said that, they explained what they meant, and they said, if you want to do something, here's what you can do. They set up Facebook pages, they set up all kinds of ways of becoming involved. And so anyone who wanted to said, yes, here's something that's going to be tangible and practical, and it's something where I can become active. And what that enabled was this remarkable network that made use of existing social capital, but also created new social capital across communities that until that point had been entirely, for the most part, entirely separate and without hardly any social connections, right? And we describe how some of that built on existing capital, so to speak, from below, but there was a meta-level orchestrator that also facilitated these kinds of interactions from above. And so what that allowed to do is through that network, people were able to map vulnerable households and acquire and distribute resources. So that enactment, I think, is very similar to what we already know from the emergent group literature, but it was the kind of, it's what I don't think we have in the emergent group literature is how it crosses these very different kinds of communities, right? So the last point I want to make is that this enactment, what also almost had embedded in it, this necessary engagement with tensions that came up, this contrasting, this challenge to act in solidarity versus paternalism, or what some people call saviorism, right? There was quite some resistance from polarizing actors. I mean, one of the activists' cars got petrol bombed because they felt that, you know, these activists were supporting the homeless in ways that were changing the community. And there's also quite a lot of stuff that we thought was interesting around how some of these emergent groups responded to decline in resources as people, you know, couldn't afford to donate anymore or return to their day jobs as the lockdowns closed down and so on. And I think some of these ways of engaging with tensions actually, you know, kind of, there might be an arrow, which I'm still thinking about, that goes back to the second box, which is about creating this identity around solidarity for these groups. So finally, just very quickly, what are the implications? The first one, I think, is that solidarity is not, if you could just go one, yes, thanks. Solidarity is not a kind of a natural thing that emergent groups respond to. It's actually something that they create. It's an active accomplishment. A crisis, number two, a crisis catalyzes this unprecedented network creation across community boundaries, you know, in this context where these communities are so separate, both on the basis of identities, but also in terms of space and physical boundaries. And then the last point is that the way that the solidarity work is kind of imbricated in this set of tensions that arise, and in grappling with these tensions, that is a challenge on the one hand, but also fosters a collective identity for these groups. So those are the implications, and yeah, so much for that. Thanks, Sophie.
Thank you so much, Ralph. I'm glad I introduced you, saying your research is always very engaged and inspiring. So thank you so much for sharing that work in progress. I already see some trends for the panel discussion along the lines of collective action, communities, emerging groups. So thank you very much for your presentation. And next, we're moving to the presentation by Satyajit.
Thanks for Sophie. Thanks for the invite. Basically, I look at the concept of social entrepreneurship and social enterprise slightly more from the perspective of developing countries. So maybe I would have some controversial statement to make to begin with. So the premise of my talk is the practice in social enterprise or social entrepreneurship is age old. Probably we are very new, researchers are very new in the discipline to see it as a body of knowledge. And more I see practicing social entrepreneurs, I think my belief gets stronger. Social entrepreneurship is seen differently in different parts of the globe, and all of us know about it. So certainly the way we look at the developing country perspective, we see largely it's an outcome of state and market kind of created gaps, right, where the social enterprise come and do something about it. So I think we see, and there are many cases, last mile delivery, affordable healthcare, etc., are the domains when social enterprise are predominantly active in these kind of countries. So that's the reason the way we look at social entrepreneurship in America versus Europe versus maybe India and Africa versus Russia. I personally engage with Russia very closely. So I see a different kind of narrative there. So probably that's the reason we don't need universal definition, because it's decoded differently. So that's my first submission. Number two is it's a multidisciplinary. It's a discipline open to every aspect of academics. Like I see technologists, I see social scientists, the management professionals, even a fundamental scientific community who looks at societal problem as a way to do the fundamental research and development. So it's a multidisciplinary also. So that's another reason probably there would be, and very profound agreement on the definition of social entrepreneurship. And I'm quite okay with that. So that's the reason the piece which you referred, Sophie, I wrote with my doctoral scholar, that we don't need a definition, and it's a clustered concept. And that's what we use, essentially contested concept, a quite age-old profound theory by Galilei to argue that it's essentially contested concept. So if we move to the next slide, please. So yeah, so what I did is I just quickly pulled out 4 bibliometric analysis just to question myself how much of it is happening, who is writing what, who is citing what. So interestingly, I saw that entrepreneurship discipline researchers were citing more versus management scholars were writing more. So the people who were engaged in more literature, of course, this is a very limited data. I cannot generalize this statement, but nevertheless, I found that there is a profound interest among the social entrepreneurship scholars and management scholars to look into social enterprises or social entrepreneurship as a scholarly discipline, while more number of publications were happening in the management discipline. So that also reinforces my statement that it's a multidisciplinary field. I'll not talk much on this slide. We can move on to the next one. Yeah, can you go to the next slide, please? Yeah. So, since I said that it's a new discipline in research, scholarly research, so certainly the types of questions, and these are so major themes or types of questions were mostly what and how type. That what is social value creation? How social enterprises are looking at opportunity? Is there a market? How they decode the market information? Do they take more risk versus the business entrepreneurs? And of course, a lot of interest in innovation, and particularly how diffusion of innovation happens. So I think there are very interesting constructs which have been built up in the research where people are asking these kind of questions. I'll move on to the next slide. Can you go to the next slide, please? Yeah. So it's quite logical. It's quite logical that we have predominantly qualitative research, wherein people are using methodology like case study, people are using methodology like grounded theory to kind of decode the information, maybe theorizing the phenomena in different contexts. And certainly, it's a basically a way to kind of creating a construct legitimacy. So a lot of, and interestingly, a lot of concepts were borrowed from entrepreneurship literature and strategic management literature. And people were kind of checking whether this concept is legitimately there in the social entrepreneurship or not. So these kind of researches we have seen, and there are quite a few research which we notice is comparing between business and social entrepreneurs. So a lot of comparative researches were there. So having said that, where do we move now? Is there anything? And since I come also balancing practice and academics, because I'm a lot into mentoring, I'm a lot into actions in the field. So I said, who is doing what? Okay, is social entrepreneur doing something different? So I see a lot of convergence is being attempted, where we are trying to balance social and economic value, if I call it as a business value. So there is a convergence, high propensity of convergence being attempted. And probably that is also guiding our research to see that how they are sustainable. So we are asking a lot of sustainable questions, business model questions, financial model questions, supply chain questions. These kind of questions are predominantly coming because we are looking for the convergence of values. Can we move to the next slide, please? Yeah. But I see another phenomena, and since I'm working with a lot of companies here in India, I see a new phenomena happening where I'm seeing corporates, business enterprises, even the large companies are setting up social incubators, and they're saying, hey, we want to do something which is a profound social value creation. And it's not a CSR. I'm not talking about the charity-based CSR. I'm saying wherein the engagement of the business knowledge is very profound, very engaging to create a sustainable social impact. So I'm also seeing that movement happening, and a couple of them I'm closely associated with. which is sometimes a part of CSR, sometimes it is beyond CSR. So business enterprises are also kind of looking at innovative business models, which will have combined social and economic benefit. So I think that's also something which will trigger a lot of research in future, and probably that's the message I would like to carry forward. I have yet not written anything on it, but these are the new phenomena I'm observing. Probably will have to make some attempt to theorize it. Can we move to the next slide, please? Can we have the, yeah. Second point I would like to make, as a part of British Council in 2015, we have instituted a study on social enterprises in India. And there were many questions asked. One question was also where these social enterprises are clustering around. It's a very geographical clustering. So we see a pattern. We see on the western, southwest part of India, a lot of social enterprises are clustering, huge number. And if you see where the social problem lies more, is actually the northeastern part of the country. So logically, more social enterprises should have been working in northeast part of country, but we see many of them clustering in southwest part of the country. And interestingly, this is the region where business enterprises are also clustered around. There are a lot of technology enterprises, there are a lot of incubators, a lot of universities, science and technology institutions. So my hypothesis, is it that there would be a natural tendency of social enterprises clustering around business enterprises? So probably this could be another research questions which we ask. But again, probably my observation is limited to India. Maybe we can ask these questions elsewhere also. Can we move to the next slide? Yeah, can we have the next slide, please, Helen? Yeah. So coming from the argument that we don't need universal definition, we need context-specific studies, and maybe we can see some patterns. I think that can be done at a subsequent stage. Probably we also need to change our ontological lenses, and probably this is also time when we can move slightly away from the management literature. We can use new methodology. In fact, I attempted to write one piece on phenomenological based narratives in South Asian countries and South Asia and Europe-based countries. So maybe we'll have to kind of engage in multiple research methods than the established one, than the popular one like grounded theory or large data survey, etc. And also probably the question which time and again I'm asking myself, and maybe all the scholars would ask ourselves, that do we need an exclusive theory on social entrepreneurship? Because there are many scholars who are saying social entrepreneurship is an entrepreneurship. How and why it should be different. I think probably the time has come when we can ask those questions. And basically what we can also look into is social entrepreneurial approach or orientation, how it is different, or how it is there a pattern when it is done in the format of a for-profit entity versus non-profit entity. And the third entity which I talked about, business enterprises are creating a kind of vertical of social enterprises. Maybe these are the new research questions all of us can ponder upon, and maybe we can pick up some of them for the future research. Thank you very much. Thanks for the patient hearing. And I really enjoy conversation here and would love to participate in the discussion. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Satyajit. Very inspiring and very interesting to hear your perspective from the Global South. So looking forward to the discussion as well. So I am next. I'm going to put a timer myself because I'm the moderator, but I need to respect the rules. Okay. So my research centers on how new ventures can influence society positively. And in the spirit of today, I try to organize my research to date to give you a snapshot of my research program. And I will highlight two of the latest trends of my research. I'm not saying they're trends of the field, that is up for discussion. So looking at the next diagram, you'll see that there is a bunch of papers that may not make that much sense when they're pieced like that. But if you keep clicking, I put animation so that we keep Ellen busy here with the slide deck. You can see that I very much enjoy writing conceptual and theoretical pieces, as well as doing empirical research. And this research, if you keep clicking, you'll see that this is organized in 5 main streams. And so the first stream really is where I started 10, 15 years ago, trying to make sense of social entrepreneurship at the individual level. What makes those individuals special? Are they special? What are their qualities as leaders as well? I'm glad Johanna is tackling some of these questions right now with some co-authors. At the organizational levels, I looked at how social enterprises achieve success in terms of scaling their impact with some modest empirical studies there, and then looking at the governance of social enterprises, which to me, the Mair, and Lutz is the most inspiring governance article on social enterprise. Encourage you to read it, and I would love to see more research on that, because I think it's a fascinating topic. I will speak more today about the research I'm doing at the civic level and some of the research, what I would call then cross level. So we can move forward. You can see the 5 themes on the next slide that kind of capture what I've been busy thinking about. And next we'll move on to one theme that I've been working on recently that taps into the topics of community and collective action. That must be the 3rd time we hear the term today. So I'm excited about the discussion that we'll have. And so the backdrop of all of our research, I think here, can be captured by the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which at the societal level kind of capture what different kinds of actors, emerging groups, as Ralph said, are trying to address, maybe as a collective, and if as a collective, how do they do so? And so there, I get inspiration from the Think Globally, Act Locally mantra from the early days of the environmental movements, which really highlighted that to preserve the health of the whole planet versus societal level, it's necessary to take action at the local level. And so we saw that very much so with the COVID-19 crisis, unfortunately, with like this global crisis, this global event, but that required communities very locally to actually enact the solutions. There are great actually descriptions of such entrepreneurial and social entrepreneurial solutions, for instance, in the collection of stories on the Schwab Foundation website. And so if you click one more, this is one of my favorite quotes of Johanna last year at the ISER conference. You'll see at the bottom of the slide, you said social footprint reflects local imprint. And I use it every time. I think it's a brilliant quote. You said it during your keynote. Actually, I'm not even sure it was on the slide. But this idea of social local is really what is interesting me. So moving forward, I wanted to kind of dig deeper into what the SDGs and the United Nations are saying about communities. And you can see, you can do 3 clicks here, Ellen. You can see that they highlight communities that not only like the ultimate beneficiaries of the 2030 agenda, but also potentially co-implementers, co-innovators of creative solutions. And so as an entrepreneurship scholar, which is my training, if entrepreneurship is an engine for positive social change, that includes more than economic development. And I'm thinking right now, this is where my thinking is these days, that community might be the glue that connects entrepreneurship to societal impact creation. And so with that, I've been publishing a couple of pieces on this theme of community. We started with a modest literature review with Tom Lumpkin and Rob Piddock, trying to see where the community level phenomena was in the social entrepreneurship literature. We saw some interesting pieces of it, which led us to do a much more thorough one published in JBV this summer. And the one I will be talking about in the next few minutes is the one that talks about civic wealth creation. If you want to wrap your head about this new concept, I'm not sure the words mean much when you hear it, civic wealth creation. If you go to the next slide, I put some pictures that maybe will stick with you. For us, it's the meeting of the Governing the Commons from Elinor Ostrom, who wrote this book about the evolution of institutions for collective action, Nobel Prize winner, with entrepreneurship. And so we define civic wealth creation. You see it's a bit of a teaser if you don't know the work. We define it as the generation of social, economic, and communal endowments that benefit local communities. And we conceptualize it as the intersection of different groups of actors, but we have abstracted these actors in terms of community, entrepreneurs, and supporters. And in the next slide, you have one visual, and maybe that's one takeaway that you can take home today, saying that for societal change to happen, we need enterprises, and we've been studying those social enterprises, all of us likely in the Zoom room today. We also need engagement of the community and engagement of supporters. So this is where my standing is with regard to community. 4 distinguishing features of civic wealth creation include a civic level of analysis. So, you know, I told you I started thinking of social entrepreneurship in terms of individual features, then moved on to the organization. And now the civic level, community level is really what I'm trying to understand, really matching what Ralph presented actually as a research project. An expanded notion of wealth, entrepreneurship still as key component of societal impact creation, and then a novel application of stakeholder theory are the 4 distinguishing features. And so for the 2 minutes left for my part, I wanted to highlight another stream of my research that I'm still developing, which concerns social entrepreneurship, but also entrepreneurial action under conditions of necessity. So the phenomenon of necessity is widespread in developing countries, and you may have this kind of maybe, you know, cliche pictures, but it's also widely spread in developed settings, especially as linked to high unemployment rates, which skyrocketed with some of the recent financial health crises that countries have experienced. And so what we did with co-authors, we proposed a reconceptualization of necessity entrepreneurship around the concept of basic needs with John Denker from Northeastern, Mark Gruber, EPFL, and in Switzerland, and Melvin Haas. And so we are proposing that we can think of entrepreneurial motivations along a continuum. Necessity entrepreneurs are the ones that operate under the condition of meeting their basic physiological and safety needs, putting food on the table, finding shelter for themselves and their family. But these actually have to be seen on a continuum of entrepreneurial motivations. And so my question today is, how do we fit social entrepreneurship within it? Can we think of it maybe not as a continuum, but, you know, how, and this is part of the great discussions we had in South Africa, isn't all, you know, under conditions of necessity, isn't all entrepreneurship social, right? So I think that's what I'm thinking about and wrestling with internally. And so I have one slide left with regard to the implications. For the first stream, I will say that I think it's good to think about the almost there, the many roles of communities for societal impact creation, thinking of community engagement. We've done, you know, work on beneficiary engagement. I would love to hear my fellow panelists' insights, because there is things out there, but maybe I'm not looking in the right place. I'm looking for more, you know, meat to chew on there. So we'd love to see more on community beneficiary engagement and thinking of community as a major key active stakeholders. And finally, the second point relates to this intersection of social necessity entrepreneurship. So with that, I'm almost on time. Thank you very much. And if I'm not mistaken, I think next we're going to break out. Yes. So we want to give the opportunity before we do the Q&A. So keep on your questions. Debbie is giving me a list. We wanted to give the opportunity for all of us to start chatting a little bit. So I think we'll be broken out into breakout rooms for a few minutes. And the question with one, you know, panelist in each of the breakout rooms. And so the leading question for us to discuss, of course, you know, you may sidetrack, is what are the important research questions about social entrepreneurship that we're not asking, that you didn't hear any of the panelists mention today, or that you think we should ask, or that you're working on and you want to get some thoughts on. And so each panelist will be in a breakout room. What are the important research questions that we're not asking is the leading question for the breakout. Thank you.
Great, we're going
everybody. So I hope you get a great discussion. I know time is limited, but hopefully some great insights in the 6-7 minutes discussion. So I'd like to start with asking maybe Johanna, Ralph, and Satyajit, what are some of the questions that were discussed, and then we'll move on to the Q&A part. Any particular ones you want to share, Johanna?
Sure, yeah, no, very interesting points, also somehow connected to the conversation we had. One question, how to expand a little bit on the community entrepreneurship part and understand how we can move beyond actually just looking at the entrepreneurial aspect, but also the impact on the community and solidarity on the ground. Some ideas of how intellectually connect a conversation with the degrowth movement. Very interesting thoughts.
Great, thank you so much. Sounds like it. Thank you very much. Ralph, do you want to share, please?
Well, Sophie, can Azadeh do that for us? We kind of allocated her a quick rapporteur role, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's okay. That's great.
Also very fantastic feedback and remarks and comments. We heard a lot, we heard a few talking about ecosystems for social entrepreneurship and social entrepreneurs, how the ecosystem can support social entrepreneurs. Linked to that, another speaker said, you know, what does it create? An enabling ecosystem. Ralph actually suggested with an emphasis on context or place. Another speaker mentioned social entrepreneurial teams, more research around that. What are social entrepreneurial research skills? And also linked to that, how can we already in the early stages of the social entrepreneurship's journey measure impact towards achieving the goals, which I thought was very interesting. And we also heard a lot about collective social entrepreneurship, connection to place, processes for addressing complex problems through collective action, organizing for social change also through collective action networks, which is kind of my research topic. So those were some feedback and remarks from our team.
Thank you so much, Azadeh. Thank you. Nice to meet you. Amazing what you can do with 6 minutes. Very good. Satyajit or somebody from your team, would you like to share?
Yeah. So we had very interesting 3 pointers, and one is close to me because I myself, I'm an educator. I'm a professor in social entrepreneurship. So the first question is, how do we make social entrepreneurship education accessible? I think that was a very, very interesting question, which was, I don't know, because I myself wrote 2 pieces on social entrepreneurship education. So I felt that's a very, very important question. The second question which came about was the question always we ask, the scalability issue, right? Is it always economics of the scale which determine or replication? And I think that's a very, very common debate which we hear. So that was the second pointer. And the third pointer is very interesting, that what are we missing? We are borrowing thoughts or research concepts from different disciplines, right? And we are keep adding to the discipline of social entrepreneurship. So is it in the process, are we missing something which is evident, and we are not looking into that since we are borrowing different thought process? So these were 3 main points which came about in our discussion. I wish we had more time to discuss.
Well, we have more time now. Thank you so much. And I'm just being informed that there were 15 rooms, which explains why maybe I had a 1 on 2. I was wondering, you know, where everybody had gone. So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts in the chat. I think we want to hear more from our fellow panelists. So sorry for the mix up here. So please keep putting and documenting your discussion results in the chat. And so we'll move on with the first question for the Q&A, which is being fed from the questions you have asked prior to at registration time, but maybe in the chat today. You can keep feeding questions in the chat as well. It's actually the question that was discussed in my group with Arjun and Pushkan, both from the Tata Institute. And I think it's very relevant to ask it to the 3 panelists, if you want to share, as you've all done social entrepreneurship research in the Global South. How is social entrepreneurship different in the Global South, and how can we, if different, how can we address that as researchers who are located and doing research in the Global South, or maybe finding a mismatch between what they read written in the West and what applies in their context? So anybody wants to start? Okay, Satyajit.
I think we look at social entrepreneurship more as a way to solve problem. It's a more of problem solving, community, society, a particular group. The problem solving could be in the form of accessible healthcare, the food and nutrition gaps, of course, community participation. I think largely this narrative works more on the global south. I'm just giving the answer short. So probably this is the narrative normally we see.
Thank you. Any other insights from Ralph? Or yeah, go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Sophie. I mean, there's a whole bunch of dimensions we could look into this, and of course, the kind of idea of institutional voids or kind of limited statehood, the kind of challenges that are faced in some of these contexts might be different, and of course, Johanna's written really important stuff on that. But one of the things that I'd like to just quickly add is that some of the, I think, cultural assumptions that exist in, let's say, sub-Saharan Africa, for example, not only do they suggest that maybe social entrepreneurship is different in this context, but they also challenge the kind of taken for granted assumptions that we have around entrepreneurship per se, right? So because, if in a certain context, it is considered to be, kind of really objectionable to be self-serving in one's pursuits, then this idea of self-oriented entrepreneuring, which in Germany or in the US especially, is considered to be kind of part of a national kind of totally beneficial or natural. Many communities in sub-Saharan Africa that is not considered to be okay. So in other words, if we don't look at if we don't assume that entrepreneurship is such, a certain kind of legitimate kind of thing, then of course social entrepreneurship, which has emerged in the Western discourse as a kind of an expansion of entrepreneurship, is also by quite fundamentally a different kettle of fish.
I agree with that, and there's a reason why I spent the first 20 years of my career studying phenomena in the global south, because I was fundamentally interested in entrepreneurial ways to tackle societal challenges, social problems, and it's simply the magnitude of the sheer size of the problem and the what you can do with an entrepreneurial way of approaching it in the global south is much starker than in the West, especially in Europe, because in Europe we have players with a clear mandate to take care of a social problem, which we often don't have in the developing work. So from a researcher, I needed to go to the global south to actually understand mechanism of actually how to approach this. It's very different from if you move away from the phenomena that we study, if we think about the concept and the travel of particular concepts that are loaded and that also basically are socially constructed, and entrepreneurship has as a concept or a theoretical concept has been developed, of course, in the West, right? And then you also have the particular practice of social entrepreneurship that is loaded, and again, it has also quite an elitist touch with it, right? So I think we need to parse out these different elements and really be very clear about what we are interested in, what we want to explain now. I think this is where we have to become much more social scientists in our studies of social entrepreneurship, to be really clear about what is the research question we ask, and thereby also not fall into the trap of calling everything criticize everything from a colonial point of view, but really be attentive to what we try to explain. Is it the phenomena, or is it the particular concept and the portability of a particular concept?
Absolutely. Well, three fascinating pieces of insight. Thank you for sharing that. I would like to, okay, Satyajit, yes. Yeah,
Sorry,
you guys.
I'll just take 1 minute. I'll just take 1 minute to add one more dimension. Also, the interesting phenomena is how the resources are pooled together. Resources are not given. There's no abundance of resources. So that's another perspective probably which stands out when we see the Global South, how community-based resources and the community collectively innovates, pooling together their resources, whatever they have. So a different kind of collaboration, maybe we can call it as co-creation, is also something probably a unique phenomenon.
Right, absolutely. Yeah. So different models of entrepreneuring, if we use that word. Absolutely. I think you highlighted, the three of you, very well, like the assumptions that come with words when they're translated in different, context here. There are so many questions I want to ask, but I'm looking here at the chat, and I think I want to give the mic back to Johanna, if you feel inspired to address that question. How do we study social entrepreneurship through the lens of political economy? Can you tell us a little bit more about your thinking in terms of social entrepreneurship and policy?
Yeah, absolutely.
We talked about collective action, collaboration, but how do we move it to the next stage?
Well, it's slightly different if we let me focus first on the political economy point of view, because that's something that is core to my heart, and Sophie knows that because she has actually seen a version of that, of a paper where we try to actually forge conversation with political economy. And if you have a political economy in mind, you need to also understand how the economy or also the politics are organized locally, and that differs very much across different contexts. And it is important because, especially in the comparative work that Nico and I are doing, it's important to understand how a social issue domain, a problem domain, is organized. In Germany, it's very different from India or from China. And what are then the implications for a social enterprise in terms of the strategy to create impact? Because that's something that really conditions your work. Now, in all fairness, it's very hard to push that work in a community of entrepreneurship scholars, because I wish we were more intellectually curious in management, in entrepreneurship, but I see that as super important. And why do I see that important? Because we undersell what we bring to the table. You have to imagine that political economists are stuck in the way they think. They do not consider social enterprises as an active participant in the political and the economic life. And yet it is on us to show that, yes, they need to be considered as a politically active actor. And this is why I strongly also believe that the work that AMS, and some of you have actually written that in the chat, AMS, the entrepreneurial ASEM, the European Social Monitor, is a very important tool to take stock of social entrepreneurial activity in different countries and feed that back to policymakers. It's particularly helpful for the EU and Brussels, but also for the individual policymakers in all the 26 countries where we have now the monitor running. So I honestly think if we are able to become more open about talking about the political economy also in social entrepreneurship research, we also will make a big leap forward to understand how we can be relevant as researchers also on social entrepreneurship.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, building on what Johanna was saying, for some years I worked with, friends who are actually just down the road from Johanna at the Freie University in the politics department there. They developed this program around governance in areas of limited statehood. My kind of little niche in that program, or the reason we kind of were speaking at least, was looking at the role of business as what happens if a state does not or cannot fulfill its governance responsibilities. Who fills that kind of vacuum or that void? And so we were looking at corporations, but I think in some contexts, social entrepreneurs do that as well. And so I think there's definitely quite a significant potential to connect to what political scientists have been working on around governance. Because I think, I mean, when you talk about, Sophie, when you talk about civic wealth creation, a big part of that is what political scientists refer to as governance, right? The provision of public goods and services. It's a different word, but I think a very, very similar kind of essence. So I think there's definitely a lot of kind of cross-fertilization that could happen from the political science people and also development studies people and the social entrepreneurship people. But I don't think I'm saying anything really new here. The one thing I do want to mention is that I think the key aspect that hasn't been mentioned a lot is this, the role of inequality in social entrepreneurship, right? So implicitly, a lot of social entrepreneurship is about addressing social inequality, but what I think connecting this to the political domain is that a lot of inequalities are politically perpetuated. And as soon as a social entrepreneur is trying to challenge such inequalities, they also challenge powerful political interests. And what I think deserves a lot more attention is that being a social entrepreneur challenging political interests in, let's say, Germany, is a very different thing to if you're doing that in Egypt or in, I don't know, China or something, right? Where the risks of political, kind of possible violent responses are so much greater. And so I think, this whole idea of courage among social entrepreneurs also, I think I'm quite fascinated by it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Satyajit, do you want to add something? Yes, please.
Yeah, so I would like to add one more dimension to this question is the social entrepreneurship is also seen to deal with the problems of marginalization. And marginalization could be for various purposes. It could be geographical location marginalization. It could be a particular group of people in the society. So how do we make it inclusive? I think there also we can see a phenomena, and we can question how is that process happening. And here I also see a role of the different actors, including the state. And here the whole premise of questioning that the social entrepreneurship in underdeveloped or developing country is because of the state's inability to provide some services, right? Is being questioned. So here the state is probably acting as an enabling role, taking an enabling role to promote social entrepreneurs to do something. So it is not insulated from the state's role. I think this is also a new phenomena. Maybe the political economy can look into, and this could be a question which all of us can look into. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yes. Okay, Ralph.
A very small rejoinder, because I think Satyajit's point is really valuable. One of the things that I think really needs a lot more attention is, and we did look at this in a corporate space, but in a social entrepreneurship space, when and why do social entrepreneurs sometimes work to complement or partner the state, and sometimes they work to replace the state? Right, and I think that is actually quite an important thing, because I've seen, at least in the corporate space, that if private actors replace the state, that can lead to all kinds of serious accountability problems, as well as an absconding state apparatus.
Thank you so much for inspiring us to be more, curious in our research. So in the spirit of respecting the time that we're all allocating to this event today, can you please close the session and your remarks with a 30-second advice for the many PhD students and junior scholars that are in the room today? 30-second, and then I'll give the floor back to Debbie. Ralph.
Wow, I mean, I think Johanna's point about intellectual curiosity is the key thing, and I suppose not to be discouraged by the kind of travails of scholarly work where feedback can be quite disheartening, and to just to kind of stay true to that curiosity, and if one journal won't have it, then surely at some other journal will much appreciate it, and will really kind of surprise you how valuable that output and outcome will really be. So that's my 20-second pitch.
Thank you. Curiosity and resilience. Satyajit, and we'll close with Johanna.
Yeah, so I have 2 points to submit here. The society is full of knowledge. A lot of knowledge is embedded in the community and in the society. So can we look at it more from the science lens and see how this body of knowledge which exists in the society as a body of science is contributing to the social enterprise creation? So that's my first research question, probably how, when, where, etc. The second question is the technology, how technology is collaborating with society to create a very profound social value. And probably there is an intersection between social innovation and technological innovation, which collectively creates a value to the society through social enterprises.
Thank you for that, Satyajit. Johanna.
I can just follow up on Ralph's point on the intellectual curiosity. Don't let your intellectual curiosity be limited by the likelihood to be published in a particular journal, and don't think that your impact as a researcher on social enterprise, on entrepreneurship, stops with actually a publication. That's only a means towards something different. And look at Debbie and what she did, giving up a tenured position. So think beyond actually just the publication part of this. That will also make you a better scholar.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Keep engaging with communities like this. Thank you all for participating in this panel, Johanna, Ralph, and Satyajit. Very honored and pleased with our discussion. And I give it back to you, Debbie, for closing.
We like to keep on time, so apologies. I'll not go over all the information here on the slide deck, but there's lessons learned that we're going to share post-event with all of you. We'll also include all the research questions as well. Don't forget to complete the survey. We like to prove that all these sessions are valuable and that we need to continue to do those. On the take-home learnings, I just want to point out a couple of these because we don't have time, but that idea of collective action of the social entrepreneurs as these orchestrators, and this opportunity that Satyajit had said about this co-creating the knowledge with those that are on the ground, that we need to have the voices of the social entrepreneurs included in our research and have them a part of this. And then how do we translate that research into practice for the social entrepreneurs? The notes that you guys were talking about, the political economy and having the researchers in those fields, is here again the voices of the social entrepreneurs, and then feeding that back to the policymakers, which is part of what we're trying to do with Catalyst 2030. So I'll go on to the next slide about Catalyst 2030. If you haven't heard of it yet, it's an insane organization that I gave up tenure for. There's over 1,700 members, $2 billion of 2 billion lives that have been touched through the work of Catalyst members, and they're primarily social entrepreneurs, but we have a huge group of academics involved. We do want to thank our partners in crime with this event. So EMES, which is, and ANSYS, I want to point out, is the African Network in Social Entrepreneurship. So if you're not a part of that group, please join them. We're also doing a new network with India Social Entrepreneurship Scholars. So we'll share that information in the chat and also follow up as well. And then even Ashoka Yu and Yuzasbi are involved. Lastly, for more research opportunities, research and outlets, we do have the Social Change Innovators online portal, which originally was designed for academics. It's now for social entrepreneurs and the stakeholders as well. But we are posting up the latest journals and the latest articles in social entrepreneurship research and trying to stay on top of this. We're right now in the pilot stage of doing this, but you'll see a good number of articles there as well. Again, thank you so much for our speakers. Absolutely brilliant session. We need to do more of these, and we're looking forward to having all of you come in the future to other events as well. So we will follow up with some suggestions and next steps. Thanks again to the speakers. If you can unmute, say goodbye, and thank the speakers, we appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Goodbye.
Bye.